Hey guys, I'm John. Welcome back to my channel. This is episode 7 of my series where I'm reading The Value of Freedom, a fully costed fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. And if you haven't already seen the previous episodes in this series, I recommend you watch them in the order that they're coming. Also, I just want to say thank you to everybody for liking and commenting and subscribing to this channel. I'm overwhelmed by the support that I've received so far from my YouTube channel as a whole. I never thought that it would grow into this, but the independence movement is growing, and part of the reason why this is important to read is because we need to have answers ready for when people who are on the fence or opposed to this, bring them up. And this document is designed to kind of get the conversation going, right? It's like open for public discussion. So go watch those previous videos in this series. But today we're going to be starting out with sustainability and the environment. And I just want to say up front, I'm glad they included this because, this is part of the conversation about what's an independent Alberta going to look like. So, background and objectives. An independent Alberta, free from the constraints of the existing climate agenda, would pursue a fulsome environmental strategy aimed at protecting, enhancing, and maintaining the natural environment and beauty which all citizens value. We anticipate that a focus on these natural landscapes, plant and animal life, without narrow focus on carbon, would result in a durable, sustainable, and resilient ecology of an independent Alberta. The additional interest in providing carbon to benefit of the ecology could harness its vast natural landscapes, 12.1 million hectares of grassland, peatlands and swamps, 5.3 to 6.6 million hectares of foothills vegetation, and 6.6 to 7.9 million hectares of mountain forests to implement a pragmatic carbon strategy. Okay, and I like the word pragmatic. That just means this is something that's going to actually work for us, that's reasonable and meets our goals and our values. But it's kind of interesting right here how they start off with kind of a broad, hey, here's the whole environment, here's lots of ideas. And then we're kind of narrowing the conversation right back down to carbon. But my question already is what are the other ideas? I have a few, but not just a narrow focus on carbon, right? By adopting practices like rotating grasslands, reforestation and sustainable forestry and foothills. I'm not going to read each one of these, okay? And you can see them right there. And species diversification with peatland protection on mountains. Alberta could sequester 10 to 33 million tons of carbon per year. And my pushback here already is these forests are here whether or not Alberta becomes independent. So is this already happening, or is this being added to our calculation? Or you see what I mean there? Now, one issue with saying that trees and plants and stuff like that sequester carbon is, yes, they absolutely do, but only while they're growing. And so in the spring and summer, the plants suck carbon out of the air, and then in the fall and the winter, then they rot, and then that puts it back into the air. So although there is a net every year, nature does naturally want to sequester carbon, you can't just say the trees sucked it all up and it's gone forever. But then my pushback to that is look, just focusing on carbon again. Right? There's a lot of other things we could be talking about our water and our soil management. Okay, we'll see if it comes up. All right, this approach driven by local priorities rather than external climate mandates enhances biodiversity and soil fertility. Risks like wildfires, climate shifts, and land use conflicts require careful management. But Alberta's resource wealth and policy autonomy enable a sustainable, self-determined environmental future. That's a really complicated sentence that's essentially saying, hey, look, these risks are real, but we're rich enough, and if we are able to decide for ourselves, then we can have a good future. We can do all these things. We can meet these goals. I mean, it's a pretty pragmatic thing to say, actually. Alberta's non-cultivated land, a natural resource. It's a non-cultivated. That means that it's not being farmed. So grasslands. The grassland region in Alberta covers approximately 12.1 million hectares. This region, which includes areas like the foothills, Fescue subregion. I wonder if rescue extends west to the Rocky Mountains and north to the southern edge of the Parkland region, comprising about 14% of Alberta's total land base. Alberta's total land base is about 66.2 million hectares. Context. This includes native grasslands such as those in the foothills, parkland, and other prairie ecosystems, but does not account for converted agricultural lands or degraded areas. Now, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I do know a few things about grasslands. And like the native prairie grasses, they have root systems that go down 6 to 10 feet, maybe even deeper into the ground. And you think about those types of plants, when they suck carbon out of the air and then put it deep into their root systems, it doesn't readily just break up at the surface and go back into the air. So it's more likely to stay sequestered. Whereas when you look at like a field that's being actively farmed, those plants, they might grow down that far, maybe a foot, and then what happens every year is they till it all up again. And so anything that rotted in the root system that would have maybe sequestered a little bit is actually just released back into the air. So focusing on grasslands and just like preserving this is a good idea. But at the same time, it comes with the trade-off that, well, we're not going to be farming it or mining it. So, I'm glad this is a conversation we need to have. Foothills vegetation definition. Excuse me. Foothills vegetation definition. The foothills natural region includes rolling hills, plateaus, and a mix of deciduous and mixed wood forests, aspen, poplar, white birch, balsam poplar. At lower elevations, transitioning to a coniferous forests at higher elevations, as well as some grasslands and parkland areas. Exact figures of the foothill natural region are less precise in the sources, but it is estimated to cover about 8 to 10% of Alberta's land base, or roughly 5.3 to 6.6 million hectares. This includes lower foothills subregion, diverse forests, and some grasslands with no specific hectare estimate, but noted as a significant portion of the region. Foothills parkland, a narrow transitional band between grasslands and forests, likely a smaller subset estimated at 1 to 2 million hectares based on described limited extent. Okay, so it's good they're just laying out all the regions, and so we know what we're talking about here. Right, you get the terms laid out. Okay, what is a mountain forestry? Well, the definition. Rocky Mountain Natural Region includes coniferous forest, lodgepole pine, Engelmann, spruce, subinal pine, fir. At higher elevations, montane forests, and some alpine meadows and peatlands. Alberta's total forest area, including foothills mountain regions, is estimated 35 to 38 million hectares. The Rocky Mountain region specifically is smaller, covering about 10 to 12% of Alberta's land base, or roughly 6.6 to 7.9 million hectares. This is primarily coniferous forest, with some overlap with foothills forest at lower elevations. The Rocky Mountain front includes montane forests and some foothills, parkland grasses, but the forested portion dominates. So summary, grasslands are about 12 million hectares, 14%. Foothills vegetation is about 8 to 10%. Mountain forestry is about 10 to 12%. So I guess the whole point of all that is to just say, hey, look, these are the natural areas that we currently have. We're not farming them. We're not, this is actually like natural the way it would have been before any industry or any civilization showed up. So presumably this is an asset because we can preserve it. Plausible carbon strategy for Alberta's grasslands, foothills, and mountain forests. Rotational grazing. Continue to implement adaptive multi-paddock grazing to enhance soil carbon sequestration by 0.3 to 0.7 tons per year. This involves rotating livestock to allow grass recovery, promoting deep root growth and soil organic matter. Restoration of degraded lands. Restore overgrazed and converted grasslands using native species to sequester 1 to 3 tons of carbon per year. Prioritize areas near existing grasslands for cost effectiveness. Protection, expand protected areas. Currently 1% of Alberta's grasslands. Conserve 2 million hectares to maintain existing stocks through conservation easements or incentives to prevent conversion to cropland, preserving existing carbon up to 200 tons of carbon per hectare. So basically what he's saying is, well, we currently protect about 1% of our grasslands. So we could protect more of this. But now, I mean, like, the land that's being protected is probably owned by, like, Ducks Canada or, you know, maybe a private organization, or it's actually Crown land. If it's owned by somebody, tell that farmer that you can't farm here anymore. You got to turn it back into grassland. I don't think that's what that's saying, but maybe it's just saying, hey, we're protecting 1%. We have up to 14% we could just protect. I think that's what it's getting at. Foothills vegetation management, reforestation and afforestation. Reforest about 0.5 million hectares of cleared degraded areas with mixed wood species, aspen and spruce, to sequester 2 to 5 tons of carbon per year in early growth phases. Integrate trees into agricultural lands for 1 to 2 tons of carbon per year. I really like this, you know, because there's a lot of areas where we could actually restore the forest. You know, areas that currently aren't really being used for much, but they've just been degraded and forgotten about. And one thing that actually comes to my mind is right in our cities. There's a lot of places where trees could grow in our cities, but we've just mowed it all down. And, you know, like I'm thinking like ditches and areas along trails and stuff like that. Like if we really got creative, we could probably reforest our cities, which I think people would love to see anyway, right? But I don't know. Let's have a conversation. Sustainable forestry, reduced clear cutting, and adopt selective harvesting to maintain carbon stocks, increasing sequestration by 0.5 to 1 ton per year. Lengthen harvest rotations to allow older trees to store more biomass. So that's a pretty big impact economically, right? Because if we're gonna, like, I've worked in the oil and gas industry, and I've seen how they do a lot of this out in places where they basically clear cut the entire region, and the logging companies build all the roads, and then they put oil and gas sites in there, but they're always out there planting trees right away. Like out by Whitecourt and, you know, at Grand Prairie, everywhere. So how much more do we need to do? Is this document kind of implying that we're not doing enough already? Like, I like to just give some pushback here. Grassland, like, you tell me, okay, if you think that we could be doing more reforestation. Should we be planting more trees? Grassland forest integration promotes silvopasture systems. Integrate trees with grazing on 1 million hectares in foothills to combine grasslands and forest sequestration benefits, targeting 1 to 2 tons of carbon per year. I don't know what this silvopasture system is. What does that mean? Mountain forest management, species diversification, plant diverse coniferous and deciduous species, lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, aspen, to diversify 2 million hectares of forests, boosting sequestration, fire management, implement controlled burns and fuel reduction on 3 million hectares to minimize catastrophic wildfires, preserve carbon stocks, and maintain sequestration rates. So this is something we need to be doing a lot more of. Like, what they're saying, like the way we do this, right? Controlled burns is you burn off portions of the forest that just are old, and we're not going to harvest the trees, and we know eventually it's going to burn, but in a controlled way, we burn it off so that it doesn't spread and destroy the whole thing. That's a really good strategy, and we need to do that right away. And then fuel reduction, especially around communities, right? If you drive through Fox Creek, you'll see a good example of this. Along the highway, they have, you can see the trees, but they regularly go and they just mulch all around the trees. And they break up all that dead wood, and they remove a lot of it, so that prevents the forest fire from getting so strong if it gets close to the town. Now, I mean, that destroys part of the forest in a sense too, right? Because the new growth isn't coming up. So, in a managed way, it's part of the solution. Here's another idea that I think about a lot. If you ever go through the river valley in Edmonton, or really anywhere, Calgary, Red Deer, but like Edmonton especially, there's a lot of deadwood in that forest. And I've often thought while I'm walking through there, man, we could get rid of that for free. Right? There are tons of people who would just go and cut up one or two of those fallen trees, and take it away and just do all the work for free. And if we had an orderly system created where it's like you get a license, you have to take a little course on what the rules are, and then maybe somebody from the city goes and tags off the things that you can take, just spray painted a little chunk of it orange or something. I think people would just go out and collect all the dead wood. But if some homeless guy, or if lightning ever strikes that forest, we're looking at forest fires right in the middle of our city. So there's another food for thought, right? Fuel reduction is a big thing we need to be talking about. Whether or not we get independence, guys. Okay, policy incentives, research and monitoring. Partner with institutions like the University of Alberta to monitor soil, biomass, carbon stocks, refining practices based on site-specific data. Use technologies like remote sensing for accurate monitoring and environmental tracking towards goals. I mean, is this not already happening? Like, I'll bet you the U of A is already involved in a lot of this. So, yes, let's do more of this. Let's start monitoring our forests more. And I the tragic fire that happened in Jasper. I hear a lot of pushback from people on social media saying that the federal government kind of just set us up for failure there, because they manage that forest. And the idea is like, people in Alberta saw that things needed to get done, but Ottawa is so far away and their priorities are so scatterbrained across the whole country, they can't effectively govern a place like Jasper. And so we should have been doing more fuel reduction. We should have probably clear cut some areas, or done some maybe not clear cut, but like selective logging or controlled burns in that area. And that would have prevented the fire. And same thing with Fort McMurray. Like, this is just going to keep happening. And Ottawa is so far away, they don't see what's happening here. But people who live here are speaking up. And so the principle, I think, holds true that a government that's closer to the people is more effective. So that's another argument I would say in favor of Alberta independence. Community engagement, educate landowners and Indigenous communities on sequestration benefits, offering training in rotational grazing, reforestation, and fire management. Strengthen laws to strongly sanction wildfires set by humans aimed at preventing this dangerous and criminal activity. So, I mean, strengthening laws. Like, it's already illegal to go in the forest and start a fire, to like deliberately burn it down. Making the law what? We're going to give you 25 years in jail, or we're going to what more could we do? Because people are going to break the law anyway. I like the idea of education. I like the idea of more monitoring and more enforcing of the current laws that we have. Strengthening laws, I don't know if there's too much we can really do there. I mean, is there a law that we could create that would improve this that we don't already have? Total sequestration potential. Okay, so it just lays it out here. You guys can see this. 6 million hectares. Okay, so he's saying 14 to 15 million hectares, or sorry, million tons of carbon per year from the grasslands, foothills, 3 to 7, and the mountain forests, 2 to. Now, I guess I just want to push back in two ways here. First of all, we're talking about carbon again. This whole conversation has been about carbon. I want to hear other ideas, right? Like water management and waste management, like garbage, and ways to like be more efficient with the energy that we use. And I think, or even like biodiversity, right? How are we going to reintroduce certain species that are maybe affected and stuff like that? But this document seems to be diving deep into the carbon argument so far, which maybe that's a big part of it, but I want to hear more. And then the other thing is, like, how did they calculate these numbers? I don't understand the methodology. I don't see a source being cited so far. I'm going to go check the sources at the end of the document here. Actually, 25 is where I'm at. All right, so it's important to check the sources. So I don't see. Okay. So I'm assuming there's some methodology to calculate this, and I'm wondering if these forests are already doing it. Is this just more creative accounting to say, hey, look at all the carbon we're sequestering, but it's been already happening this whole time, so it's really kind of neither here nor there. Again, I just want to give fair pushback. Right? This is the kind of stuff that, people who are opposed to this will also easily point out, so we need to be ready for it. So implementation steps. Year 1 and 2. Pilot rotational grazing. Reforestation priorities. Okay, establish baseline carbon measurements. So yeah, take a scientific approach to this, right? Let's go take some measurements to see where we are, and then, remeasure over time and see if we're making improvements. I'm pretty sure that rotational grazing is already happening. If we're just talking about farmers' fields, like they take care of this on their own. Year 3 to 5, scale up reforestation and protection, targeting 10% of Alberta's grasslands and about 5% of foothills mountain forests. So more reforestation, good. 5 to 10 years, expand protected areas, refine forestry practices, and integrate agroforestry, monitor sequestration. Okay. Carbon offset, sequestered 10 to 33 million, contributing to our climate goals. Ecosystem health improves soil fertility, biodiversity, and resilience. Scalability leverages Alberta's large land base. Okay, so the risk is the cost, restoration, and monitoring require significant investment. $100 to $500 per hectare of reforestation. I don't know where that estimate's coming from. Is that just an educated guess? Issues. Scale. So implementing across millions of hectares requires coordination and policy support. Time lag. High sequestration rates are temporary. Declining ecosystems mature. Land use conflicts, agricultural or industrial demands may compete with in conservation efforts. This strategy leverages Alberta's diverse ecosystem and maximize while balancing ecological and economic goals. It requires coordinated effort among policymakers, researchers, and landowners to overcome risks and scale up effectively. Alberta's sovereign Indigenous people and an independent Alberta. Okay. So I don't really know much more to say on this, but things that I think we should be doing for the environment, we should be doing more composting, which cities already do this a lot, but methane is a carbon, greenhouse gas that's more potent than carbon dioxide. And our landfills, when you put stuff into a landfill that's biodegradable, it rots, it produces methane because it rots in an environment with no oxygen. So more diverting of that, which we're already doing a lot of that. Like in my city, you have to separate your organics. We could scale that up some more. Protecting the shoreline, right, of creeks and rivers. We could do more of that. For example, there's an area that I'm familiar with where the local farmer farmed right up to the edge of it, of the creek, and that actually destroyed the creek. And then I was part of an environmental initiative where we went and planted trees along the shore, and over about 10 years monitored it. And the trees all took root, and the soil stabilized and it stopped eroding. And it took a little bit away from the farmer, right? But it stabilized that whole creek bank. And then beavers started coming back in there, and they started building dams, which then actually caused more water to stay in the soil, and made it more of a biodiverse ecosystem. So it improved the wetlands in the area, like, little things like that. And I also think maybe more recycling. I don't know. What else can we do to help the environment? I'm just against the carbon tax in principle. That's the issue I want to get to here, because the things that we use carbon for, right? Like transportation and energy and food production, like, we need these things. Our civilization is dependent on carbon, and we're seeing it happen right now with this war happening in Iran, where the demand for carbon just can't, or for like fossil fuels can't just go away. Like, the demand is there. It's an inelastic good. People need to buy it no matter what the price, and no matter what the costs. And so our whole civilization depends on this. So increasing a carbon tax isn't going to cause people to use less of it. It doesn't work. So if you're worried about carbon, you got to find ways to actually use less of it, or to put more of it in the ground, which I guess is what they're trying to do, right? With that carbon sucking machine. I don't know enough about how that technology works to know if it's actually viable. I know John Bolton called it a giant carbon sucking machine, which is a good rhetorical thing, but I'm a little bit more open-minded to the idea. But again, is it cost effective, right? To me, it would make more sense to put a carbon sucking machine on top of a factory that is like pumping it out right at the source. I don't know if they're just planning on sucking it out of the thin air. Like, go to places where it's actually coming out. I don't know. Now I'm just running my mouth, guys. But I'm trying to get the conversation going here. So what are some actual things that we could do as an independent Alberta that we could look back and say, yeah, we're actually really improving the environment here. We're doing something better than what Canada was going to do for us. Like, I'd like to hear from some landowners. I'd like to hear from people who maybe know a little bit more about this. So thank you very much for watching. Cheers.